Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us as usual. Well, if you had nothing better to do last night, for 3 hours that is, I'm sure maybe you might have watched the Democratic debate held by CNN and New York Times. I did, and some of it was interesting, and some of it was a yawn, but we'll get to all of that. The debate took place as the impeachment is moving ahead, and the resistance from Donald Trump is growing, and Warren is up in the polls, and we all witnessed the deepening divide in our country here. And all of that was at play last night in the questions and the candidates' statements and responses. We saw a left and moderate divide in a very deep and serious way. And it was really interesting to watch. There were clear differences on issues around taxing wealth and what to do about wealth in this country, about Medicare for all, and whether that was feasible or not. And starting with impeachment and going throughout the debate, you heard the focus on defeating Donald Trump. This was very interesting. Things were left out were interesting as well. Climate change wasn't mentioned very much, and neither was race. And those are two major issues facing our country that people don't often want to talk about in depth for many reasons. Well, we're joined now again by Dr. Kimberly Moffitt, who's Associate Professor and Chair of Language, Literacy, and Culture at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She is a media critic covering politics and pop culture, co-editor of The Obama Effect, and the forthcoming volume, Flotus Effect, and that'll be coming out soon. And good to have you with us once again, Kimberly. And Sasha Abramsky is a regular contributor to The Nation. He writes his numerous books. He's had 8 books out, the most recent being Jumping the Shadows, The Triumph of Fear and the End of the American Dream. And Sasha, great to have you back as well.
Good to be on the show.
So this thing really did show the divide, I think, that we see among Democrats, moderate and left. And let's just take a look real quickly and watch this piece about whether we should be taxing wealth, which kind of was the cornerstone of that debate, I think.
Is the goal of your plan to tax billionaires out of existence?
When you have 500,000 Americans sleeping out on the street today, when you have 87 million people uninsured or underinsured, when you got hundreds of thousands of kids who cannot afford to go to college and millions struggling with the oppressive burden of student debt, and then you also have 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of American society, that is a moral and economic outrage.
Senator Sanders is right. There have been 40 years where corporations have bought this government, and those 40 years have meant a 40-year attack on the rights of working people and specifically on organized labor. I would undo every Republican tax cut for rich people and major corporations.
Demonizing wealth people. What I talked about is how you get things done. And the way to get things done is take a look at the tax code right now. The idea we have to start rewarding work, not just wealth.
My question is not why do Bernie and I support a wealth tax? It's does everyone else on this stage think it is more important to protect billionaires than it is to invest in an entire generation of Americans?
Thank you, Senator Warren.
I want to give a reality check here to Elizabeth, because no one on this stage wants to protect billionaires. Not even the billionaire wants to protect billionaires. We just have different approaches. Your idea is not the only idea.
So to me, it was interesting just to watch some of this, to see that, you had Steyer, who is a billionaire on the supporting the idea of taxes. You had Klobuchar and others who were kind of pushing a very moderate agenda, saying, we want to get more money from the wealthy, but this is not the way to go about it. So how did this play out politically? I mean, how deep was this for you in terms of what it portends in the battle against Donald Trump and for the Democrats in next year? And what it sets up as a political battle between left and moderate inside that world? Sasha, let me start with you.
Well, watching the debate, it seemed to me that, as you said, there's this very clear divide. You've got Warren and Sanders who are unapologetically saying we need to restructure the economy. We need to restructure the way we distribute resources, the way we tax people. We need to think big. And then you have this other group, and Buttigieg was the one who sort of spearheaded this yesterday, and Amy Klobuchar as well. And look, if you think too big, you risk alienating the middle. And if you alienate the middle, you get nothing, and then you end up with Donald Trump Mark II for the next 4 years. What struck me was that all of the energy in that room was focused around Sanders and focused around Warren. that everybody else was playing catch up. They weren't putting forward their own policies. They weren't putting forward, really vibrant, dynamic alternatives. All they were trying to do was pop the bubble around those two progressive candidates. And for me, as I was watching it, and admittedly, I thought the format was, quite bizarre and not particularly fruitful. As I was watching these soundbite snippets, it seemed to me that Warren in particular was extraordinarily successful at pushing a programmatic vision. And that everybody else, the more they tried to attack her programmatic vision, they almost seemed smaller by default, that their ideas seemed to be sort of not nearly as monumental as the needs of the moment. It was really interesting to watch.
How'd you see that, Kimberly?
Yes, I do believe that Elizabeth Warren in particular was the candidate in the hot seat last night, where many of the other candidates felt like they needed to respond to her. But what she did a good job of showing that separated her from the rest of the candidates is that she did have plans, that she was already thinking through how to tax the wealthy and what it would lead to if she was able to do so. The only concern that I had is, even as other candidates were pushing back on her to show that she was a bit too extremist as a left, in the left, and that they were more moderate, what also came apparent is that she seemed to be more unwilling to collaborate. That this is just the way things will be, instead of finding a way to create a coalition and work together with others in the government.
Sasha, how do you feel about the last thing Kimberly said about the take no prisoners end of Warren?
I think that was certainly the way that the people who were pushing back against Warren's plans tried to posit it, that this is somebody who is very good at talking the talk, but when it comes to actually building coalitions, getting legislation passed, that she would be less effective. And I think, it's a viable concern. When you think as big as both of the progressive candidates are thinking, when you think about structural changes of the magnitude that they're now proposing, there is a risk that you run up against congressional realities of gridlock. And there is a risk that you end up coming into power with these great ambitions and these New Deal kind of restructuring ideas. And then you come up against the same problem that the last many, many presidents have come up against, which is that it's extremely hard to craft congressional majorities around anything, let alone big picture reforms. That said, I think, the job of any politician in a debate is to try and explain to their audience what they stand for. And that goes for whether you're a left-wing politician or a conservative politician, right, that you have to have a viable ideological and moral vision. And one of the things that struck me in the debate yesterday, it seemed to me there were some candidates who clearly said, look, I have a vision about society. There were other candidates, and I think Biden I'd count among them, who just seemed to say, well, I'm an alternative to Donald Trump, and I got a few good sound bites. I'll beat Donald Trump like a drum, was what Joe Biden said. But when it came to actual policy specifics, what struck me is that, here's Joe Biden, who, by all measures is the most experienced person in the room, and yet he's avoiding policy specifics. And I'm not sure that's a winning solution going into the 2020 election.
That's really interesting. So let me explore this in two ways here, the time that we have. So we all saw, many people, especially Cory Booker. Cory Booker had these statements where he was talking about how Democrats have to stop fighting among themselves if they have any possibility of beating Trump. And this is what Cory Booker had to say.
We've got one shot to make Donald Trump a one-term president. And how we talk about each other in this debate actually really matters. I've had the privilege of working with or being friends with everybody on this stage, and tearing each other down because we have a different plan, to me, is unacceptable. I have seen this script before.
So when you look at that, and then you look at this debate they had around health care, and this, to me, gets to the point of what I'm trying to ask.
Senator Sanders acknowledges he's going to raise taxes on the middle class to pay for Medicare for all. You've endorsed his plan. Should you acknowledge it too?
So the way I see this, it is about what kinds of costs middle-class families are going to face. So let me be clear on this. Costs will go up for the wealthy, they will go up for big corporations, and for middle-class families, they will go down. I will not sign a bill into law that does not lower costs for middle-class families.
Look, this is why people here in the Midwest are so frustrated with Washington in general and Capitol Hill in particular. Your signature, Senator, is to have a plan for everything, except this. No plan has been laid out to explain how a multi-trillion-dollar hole in this Medicare for All plan that Senator Warren is putting forward is supposed to get filled in. I don't think the American people are wrong when they say that what they want is a choice. And the choice of Medicare for all who want it, which is affordable for everyone because we make sure that the subsidies are in place, allows you to get that health care.
Let's be clear. Under the Medicare for All bill that I wrote, premiums are gone. Co-payments are gone. Deductibles are gone. All out-of-pocket expenses are gone. But I do think it is appropriate to acknowledge that taxes will go up. They're going to go up significantly for the wealthy.
I believe the best and boldest idea here is to not trash Obamacare, but to do exactly what Barack Obama wanted to do from the beginning, and that's have a public option that would bring down the cost of the premium and expand the number of people covered and take on the pharmaceutical companies. That is what we should be doing instead of kicking 149 million people off their insurance in 4 years.
So when you look at these things and take them in total, I mean, this is the question that jumped out at me in this debate last night, which was, there was this huge sense of we have to beat Donald Trump. People talked about impeachment in the very beginning of the debate. These debates taking place on healthcare, which really showed a divide on how to get to the place where everybody's covered in this country, which has been going on since Obama. But what about that? But this idea that Democrats could eat themselves alive and let Trump win, and coupled with, I think, what you were saying a little earlier, Sasha, just about nobody. If you don't have a platform, you don't have an idea that people can really put their hands around and go, yes, this is what we need to fight for, they could actually lose. Sasha, why don't you start, then we'll go to Kimberly.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought, and, not just in the current era, but I've always thought that if you are going to vie for high office, you ought to have a vision that is big enough to fill the space of the high office you're going to occupy. And that goes for, whether you're talking about the US president or the United Kingdom's prime minister or, wherever it is, that whether you're in a superpower or whether you're in a smaller regional power, if you think you're good enough to be in charge of that country, you have to have ideas that meet the moment. Because there are always problems, whether it's healthcare access, whether it's foreign policy concerns, whether it's trade policy, whether it's coverage educationally to make sure that every kid in the country gets access to quality education. You have to have a big vision. And I think one of the things that the Democrats have tried to do, and not very successfully in recent years, is triangulate. That they're a little bit afraid of having too big a vision because they're a little bit afraid of marginalizing one part or another of their constituency. Now, I think, when you're going into an election like 2020, we know the stakes. We know the moral stakes. We know the stakes for the survival of the Constitution, for the survival of balances in government. We know the stakes. We know that temperamentally Donald Trump is a dictator, that if he were given leeway, he would basically break down all of those systems that hold the American democratic experience together. We know that. But that's a starting point. If you want to actually convince tens of millions of Americans that there's something better out there, you can't just say Donald Trump's bad. We all know he's bad. We all know he's a catastrophe. But the question is, what better vision are you going to offer? What hope are you going to offer to people who live in poverty? What security are you going to offer to people who are worried about getting sick and how they're going to pay their medical bills? And so I think this idea that we've got to sort of be incredibly cautious and not rock any boats, Hillary Clinton tried in 2016, and it didn't work.
Very, very important. And
I do think it requires the Democrats to be more big and bold in the decisions that they're making. But I also think they are stuck with some egos that are still at the table and unwilling to step back and say that maybe not me this time, and that we need to consider who is the candidate, or at least the few candidates that can pull this off to not only beat Donald Trump, but also instill a different vision that takes us in a different direction than what he has for the last 3 years.
I'm curious what we all think also about what the overall take on this is. I was really taken with Pramila Jayapal and what she had to say after this debate. She tweeted this particular thing. She said, "How did we make it through a 3-hour Democratic debate that included a question about who is your friend, but not how are you saving our planet? Which I thought was a great tweet. And, you know, when you look at that tweet, first of all, that friend's question was, where did that come from? It was a CNN question, was a New York Times question. I don't know where that came from.
Last week, Ellen DeGeneres was criticized after she and former President George W. Bush were seen laughing together at a football game. Ellen defended their friendship, saying, we're all different, and I think that we've forgotten that that's okay, that we're all different. So in that spirit, we'd like you to tell us about a friendship that you've had that would surprise us, what impacts it's had on you and your beliefs.
So when you look at that, I mean, there was a lot missing, it seemed to me, Kimberly, in this debate that they did not focus on and saying, who is your friend?
Yeah, it was, I don't know whose question it is, but it was an idiot. That part we can, I hope most of us can agree on, because I don't think it added or took away from much of what took place for that 3-hour period. And I do feel like that feeds into what many of us believe about American society already, is this celebrity culture is more significant to us than what the reality is for the average American day to day. And so let's talk about, you know, a former president and a celebrity and the fact that they have this interesting relationship with each other, instead of talking about what are the issues that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So it made no sense. I'm sure it felt like a nice way to wrap up a debate, but recognizing that there were major issues on the table, in addition to healthcare being talked about last night, but issues of housing, issues of immigration, issues of race, issues of climate change, to not deal with those was a missed opportunity for all 12 of those candidates.
Sasha?
Yeah, I agree entirely. And look, I mean, to me, right from the get-go, the format was inane. You know, when you put 12, seriously, you put 12...
No, it was, yes. But your subtle British humor always gets to me. I like it. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
It's my best. But, you know, the serious answer is you put 12 candidates on a stage standing next to each other. Right from the get-go, you're not going to get detailed answers. You've got too many people on that one stage.
Right.
You then say, we're not going to have any opening statements. Well, opening statements are where people give their policy priorities. You then ask a series of entirely random, disconnected questions and give them 75 seconds to answer, or 40 seconds to respond, or 15 seconds for a second rebuttal, or whatever these time constraints were. And all you're doing is you're reducing these complex policies to a set of sound bites. And the longer the debate went on, the more frustrated I got, because, you know, as you've just mentioned, these incredibly important issues, abortion access, climate change, these huge issues were either not touched on at all, or they were touched on by one candidate for a few seconds, and then the moderators moved to a completely different topic. I felt like I was in a pinball machine, just bouncing around entirely randomly. And, you know, I think it comes back a little bit to what Dr. Moffat was saying a few minutes ago about egos who need to get out of the way. We're 2 months out from the first primaries and caucuses, 2.5 months out. There should not still be 12 candidates in the ring. There are an awful lot of people in this debate last night who have no chance of being the nominee, and they serve as a distraction. And until we work out a format which says, all right, we've got a few candidates with a viable chance, let them have a detailed policy discussion. Until we get to that, we're going to have this kind of inanity that we saw last night, which ends with this question, who's your strangest friend, which added absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and I think that you saw people like both Booker and Castro, from my perspective, watching how they did not jump on Warren, were kind of vying for, can I be your vice president? So I was like, you know, I felt that was going on as well.
Yeah.
So we have to wrap this up, I know. So it just, you know, they attacked a subject here last night, though, that it is in the headlines and on some people's minds, many people's minds, which is Syria.
Would you send American troops back into northern Syria to prevent an ISIS resurgence and protect our Kurdish allies?
I would not have withdrawn the troops, and I would not have drawn the additional 1,000 troops who are in Iraq, which are in retreat now, being fired on by Assad's people, and the President of the United States saying, if those ISIS folks escape from the prisons they're in, they'll only go to Europe and won't affect us. It has been the most shameful thing that any president has done in modern history. Turkey is the real problem here. And I would be having a real lockdown conversation with Erdogan and letting him know that he's going to pay a heavy price for what he has done.
The slaughter of the Kurds being done by Turkey is yet another negative consequence of the regime change war that we've been waging in Syria. Donald Trump has the blood of the Kurds on his hand, but so do many of the politicians in our country from both parties who have supported this ongoing regime change war in Syria that started in 2011, along with many in the mainstream media who have been championing and cheerleading this regime change war.
But when we abandon the international stage, when we think our only choices are between endless war or total isolation, the consequence is the disappearance of U.S. leadership from the world stage, and that makes this entire world a more dangerous place.
And I think that it's a real, this is a conundrum for progressives, and saying don't get, who opposed the Iraq War, opposed what happened in Libya. When I talk to people on the left in both Iraq and Afghanistan especially, they all say the same thing: you destroyed our country, now you can't just walk away from us. So people are caught in a real dilemma with this. So how do you think they handle that? Sasha, then Dr. Kimberly Moffat.
Yeah, honestly, I thought the question itself was unfair, because basically the question was, would you have done what Donald Trump did?
Right.
Withdrawn the troops, or would you reinstate the troops if you were president? Well, if the election were tomorrow, that question makes sense, but the election's 13 months away still. And so, the idea that anybody can respond to the catastrophic mess that Trump is creating now by saying, here's what I'd do in 13 months. We don't know what on earth is going to be going on in that part of the world in 13 months, or how quickly the instability is going to spiral into complete and utter chaos. And so, to me, this is Trump's mess. And I think it's absolutely unfair to force any other candidate to respond how they would deal with this 13 months down the road. This is Trump's mess, and it's his administration that needs to work out what to do, not in 13 months, but this week. And it should be on him, not on any other candidate. It should be on him to clean up the disaster that he's now in the middle of creating.
Dr. Kimberly Moffat, your thoughts?
I actually agree with that stance. And I also feel like in some respects, and maybe it's because of how diabolical I think our president can be sometimes, is that he's created a mess that he does plan to clean up to be able to demonstrate his greatness and his ability to repair anything that is in disrepair. But the idea of expecting the candidates to respond to that and take ownership, I found problematic, and it wasn't something that they needed to have to deal with. There are more pressing issues that are happening in our country, and that's not to minimize the Syria situation. That's simply to say that our current administration has to own that, but there are other issues that are occurring right now that do have some impact on these candidates and will impact these candidates moving forward that I felt like they needed to deal with last night.
So let me close with this. Close with this for the two of you. What we walk away with from this debate. I mean, to me, there was a clear divide here between moderates saying, "Oh no, stop, don't go so fast," and Warren and Sanders pushing and just politically looking at it. Biden kind of being further falling in the shadows a bit. What he has is he's Obama's vice president. But what do you think this goes from here? What about this overall question of this seeming divide and lack of direction Democrats have facing this Trump administration, this rise of fascism, and the fact that you have 46 million people in this percent of the people in America still backing Donald Trump. So how do we walk away from this? Let's start with Kimberly Moffat, and we'll conclude with Sasha Abramsky.
Again, I go back to the point that what we need to walk away with is who are going to be our short list of candidates that need to be considered for the Democrats. And until we get to that point, we find ourselves caught up in a lot of minutia that distracts us from what the real issues are. And while that's going on, Donald Trump is working on continuing to build his base and support to demonstrate why he would be the best person to continue into the next administration.
Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that as long as you have 12 candidates in the ring, it's very, very hard to focus on this huge issue, which is that we're witnessing in real time the corrosion, perhaps the destruction of the American democratic experiment. I mean, in terms of what I took from the actual debate last night, the overriding impression I got was the irrelevance of Joe Biden. And this, this is really fascinating because he's been anointed as the front runner, but the longer he's in the public eye and the longer he's sort of at the center stage in these debates, the more he seems to be sort of essentially fading into the background. And that you have these contrasts now between, again, Warren and Sanders on the one hand, who have this sort of peace pact going on, so they're tag teaming a set of progressive policies, and then these younger, assertive, self-proclaimed moderates centered around Pete Buttigieg, who are saying, well, hang on a second, you're going too far, too fast. And that's the divide we're seeing. I think what we're going to see going down the road, we're probably going to see it reduced fairly quickly to between 6 and 8 candidates instead of the current 12. And then beyond that, maybe 4 or 5 going into the actual primaries themselves, and especially going into Super Tuesday. But I've got to say, unless Joe Biden works out a way to connect much more with his audience, he's not going to be the front runner for very much longer.
There's a reason why Joe Biden didn't win the nomination before when he tried. So I think it's not just his age, and it's a lack of substance there a lot. But anyway, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate the time both have taken with us here at The Real News. Sasha Abramsky, Dr. Kimberly Moffat, look forward to another conversation soon. We'll see where this takes us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for The Real News Network. Thank you all so much for watching us. Let us know what you think. Go to our website, well, you're there now probably, if you're not on YouTube, and let us know what you think. Take care.
Thanks a lot for watching. Appreciate it. But do us one more solemn favor. Hit the subscribe button below. You know you want to. Stay up on the videos.